You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
Sarah Roberts is in jeopardy.
Hey, lady, how about it?
Stay with her. Help her, for she has begun to feel the awful horror of the hunger. John Blaylock, the hunger, has given him everlasting life. Until now, pray for him. Miriam Blaylock. She feeds 1 day in 7 on the unsuspecting, and soon she will turn into something that you will never be able to forget. No matter how hard and how long you try, fear her.
What have you done to me?
Forever and ever.
And life signs terminate right here.
What am I going to do?
The timeless beauty of Catherine Deneuve. The cruel elegance of David Bowie. The open sensuality of Susan Sarandon. Combined to create a modern classic of perverse fear.
Hi, this is Annie Rose Malamet, and you're listening to Girls, Guts, and Giallo. Today, I'm joined by Lainey Bird, photographer, New York.
Hello.
Hi, Lainey.
Hi.
And we're going to be talking about the film The Hunger, directed by Tony Scott, starring Catherine Deneuve, Susan Sarandon, and David Bowie. So, Lainey, before we get into it, do you want to say a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you're about?
Sure. So my name is Lainey. I'm both a fetish photographer, and then I lead a bit of a double life as a video editor, working in a lot of commercial production here in New York.
Cool.
Yeah.
Lainey's work is so amazing. You're one of my favorite photographers.
Thank you.
And it's amazing that I actually know one of my favorite photographers. And I think this is the perfect movie for you to do. When did you first see it?
So I saw The Hunger for the first time when I was in college. So I must have been like 19 or 20. I was taking a women in film class because I went to an art school in San Francisco. And that was one of the academic classes that they offered. And I had this amazing teacher whose name I can't remember, but she would show up to class in like a pencil skirt and pleaser heels and had like long black hair and blunt bangs. And like in hindsight, she was totally like in the San Francisco kink scene. And I like was just too like closeted and like slow to like see that at the time. But she was amazing. And so she was the one that kind of like introduced this film as part of our school course. So that was the first time that I saw it.
Well, if you're out there, professor.
Random professor whose name I can't remember.
Yeah, hit us up.
Love her.
You sound really great.
Yeah, she was really cool.
I saw this movie in high school. One of my friends was like, we were obsessed with David Bowie. And one of my friends was like, oh my God, I just watched this movie and you have to watch it. And ever since then, I'm just really excited to do this movie because it is one of my absolute all-time favorite movies. Same. And I feel like I say that about every movie on the podcast.
You're like, but this time I mean it.
Yeah. It's genuinely, I mean, I've like modeled my entire aesthetic and life around this movie. I feel
same.
like
It's like informed so many things in my life, just in terms of like music and art and lighting design and like everything that I love in terms of like art and aesthetics. Like, and I feel like can kind of come from this.
I totally see that in your work as well, like really heavily. When you said you wanted to do this movie, I was like, of course, that makes so much sense. So like we said, it's directed by Tony Scott.
Yes.
And
Ridley Scott's younger brother.
Absolutely. And Catherine Deneuve, gorgeous as Miriam Blaylock, Susan Sarandon, and as her new consort, vampire consort, and David Bowie as Miriam's lover. And it's based on a book by Whitley Strieber. Have you read the book?
No, I did not even know that it was based off a book until I started doing research.
It's really good.
Podcast, so. You've read it before?
Yeah. I really like it. I read it last year around this time. The movie, just a side kind of fun fact, is edited by Pamela Power. Shout out to women editors, right? And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she also did Legend, and which one is another movie I love, and G.I. Jane.
Cool.
And the gorgeous costumes by Milena Canonero, who's an Oscar winner, and she's really prolific. And she did the costumes for Marie Antoinette, many Wes Anderson films, which whatever, I kind of hate Wes Anderson.
And also like hate Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
Passion. I don't need to like go on that tangent.
I feel like every goth hates Wes Anderson. Chariots of Fire and A Clockwork Orange, which is really cool.
It's awesome.
And she's so dedicated to her craft that one day on filming The Hunger, she disappeared, was nowhere to be found. And it was discovered eventually that she had flown to Rome to purchase fabric for a handkerchief David Bowie was supposed to wear in the movie.
Wow, I have so much respect for that.
I know.
It's like some shit that I would do.
Right. And
if I had the money to do so.
Absolutely. And she was unable to find the fabric in London, so she flew all the way to Rome at her own expense.
Wow.
And bought the fabric instead.
Wow.
I feel like she's a Sagittarius or something.
Probably.
Yeah. The art direction was by Clinton Cavers, who's also really prolific and did films like Alien, Pink Floyd's The Wall, Quest for Fire. And I know you were saying you really love the art direction in this movie.
Yeah. And also Alien is one of my favorite films.
So that makes a lot of sense.
I think that's really great that, there's like a connection between the two.
Yeah. David Bowie actually learned how to play the cello for this movie.
Impressive.
Amazing. And he also said that in order to make his voice suitably hoarse for when he ages so drastically in the movie, he stood on the George Washington Bridge every night and screamed all the punk rock songs he knew.
I'm sure there was a lot that he knew too.
It's so fucking good.
I love that. I wish I was just driving by when that happened.
And then David Bowie is just screaming into the night off the George Washington Bridge.
Like a Dead Boy song.
Yes, it's so good. When I was doing research for this movie, I was just like, I love this even more than I thought I did. I mean, just the pure dedication to it.
Yeah.
And it did not get good reviews.
No, it got terrible reviews.
Yeah, because people just didn't understand.
I mean, I can kind of understand why it got terrible reviews. There's definitely some like messy plot points and parts of the film that like don't totally make sense. And it's really like visually driven, but not so much in terms of like the script or like the character development. I was doing research on the director, and I guess he got his start working in like commercial advertising and music videos.
Yeah.
So he was very much coming from a place of like just caring about style and less about like actual substance of whatever message he was trying to like sell to his audience. And I feel like you can kind of see that when you watch this film, that he was just so enamored by like lighting and cinematography and editing that like there are parts of the film that just sort of like fall flat.
Yeah.
Like his priorities were just different.
Yeah.
Compared to other filmmakers.
It's true.
So.
Yeah. And I mean, the book, to be honest, has much stronger plot.
Yeah,
obviously. Sure. There's a few key differences in the book. Like, for example, the relationship with Alice is a lot more fleshed out. And ending is super different.
Yeah.
Like Miriam doesn't die at the end of the book. Actually, everybody else dies. And
I like that so much better.
Exactly. And she just goes on to like live more years.
Wow.
And there's a sequel called The Last Vampire, which is about a detective trying to find her.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a book called The Celluloid, or there's a documentary and a book called The Celluloid Closet, which I reference a lot on this podcast. And it's a book, documentary from 1995, and it's about the history of homosexuality in film. And Susan Sarandon said that in the screenplay for The Hunger, for the sex scene that they filmed, which by the way they had to film on Susan Sarandon insisted they film on a closed set.
Yeah, I guess they filmed it in like a auto garage. Or something.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It originally called for her to be demonstrably drunk in the lead up scene to her sex scene with Catherine Deneuve, but Sarandon asked for it to be changed so that her character had only a single sip of wine and then spilled the rest of the glass, because she wanted to make it clear that her character was choosing to have sex with Miriam instead of doing it because of the alcohol. And also because you wouldn't have to, quote, you wouldn't have to get drunk to bed Catherine Deneuve. I don't care what your sexual history to that point had been. So I just love
also
that.
True.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this could be a very, there's, when we talk about queer film, there's like textual and then there's subtextual representations of queerness. And this is very textual. Like it's there in the movie without ever, but it's never explicitly spoken about. And it could easily be very, I hate this word, but problematic.
Yeah.
But I think that choice of Susan Sarandon insisting that it be this really consensual scene.
Right. She also comes on to her like super hard too.
Yeah.
Like in the piano scene.
Yes.
The sex scene.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
David Bowie was intimidated by Catherine Deneuve, but he got on really easily with Susan Sarandon. The movie's set in New York, but nearly all of it was shot in London. And in an interview with the Daily Beast in July 2014, Susan Sarandon revealed that she had an affair with David Bowie while they were working on this film.
Wow. I want to be in the middle of that sandwich.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. I know. Oh, so good. I wish that they all three of them had an affair.
I mean, maybe they did, and it's just like not public knowledge.
Yeah, they're like, Catherine won't let us talk about it.
Yeah.
This was Tony Scott's first theatrical feature. The film also spurred a short-lived TV series of the same name, The Hunger, which ran for 3 years, which I had no idea about.
I didn't know about that either until I was searching to watch the movie, and you can watch the second season of The Hunger on Amazon Prime. David Bowie hosts it, apparently.
Okay, that's what I'm doing.
I had no idea that. I don't know if it's good or anything.
Probably not.
Yeah, but it's on Amazon, so if you're interested in
check it out. The series broadcast 14 years after the movie and had the same title, same kind of vampire lore, but had no plot or character connections to the film. Ridley Scott was supposed to direct this film, but decided to pass when he heard that David Bowie was in on the deal.
Why?
I don't know. I wonder what the story is there. Yeah, maybe David Bowie was hard to work with.
I mean, I wouldn't judge him for it.
Yeah, I could see that though. And the makeup artist, Anthony Clavette, who was famous within the fashion world for his work in Italian Vogue, was also brought onto the project after he was introduced to the director by the costumer, Melina Cananero. So I don't typically talk about the costumers and the makeup artists unless it's really worth noting. And I feel like in this film, it's
absolutely
worth, because that's, like you were saying, the plot is not super complicated.
Yeah,
the plot is not really the focus of the movie.
No, it's really not.
Extremely aesthetic.
Yeah, it's like eye candy.
It's eye
like
candy.
An hour and a half of just like beautiful 80s goth eye candy.
I know. Whenever people tell me like, "Oh, I didn't really like the plot," I'm like, "You're
not supposed to."
Yeah, you're missing the point completely. It's not about that for me at all.
Right. Same.
So now, is there anything else from your notes that you wanted to talk about? the history of the film?
Maybe not necessarily like the history of the film, but I think something that I find really interesting, or an interesting way of thinking about this film in particular, is when you're sort of thinking about it within the context of what was happening in the 1980s at the time, and maybe like why this film was so stylized, and like why there's such like a heavy hand in terms of like subculture in it. Like goth subculture is like so blatant in this film.
Absolutely.
And I think it's informed by everything else that was sort of happening politically and economically and just within pop culture at that time. I don't know if you want me to get into that now.
Yeah, get into it.
But we
get
can
into it.
Break down some scenes that kind of like relate back to that. But I think just like a couple of important notes about other things that were happening at the time was that Ronald Reagan had just been elected in 1981. And so he sort of like introduced Reaganomics to the country, and it had this like dramatic shift on the economic wealth of this country. And so I feel like the 80s were really a time of like excess, like the wage gap just became so extreme. And so I think you can see that in a lot of the pop culture that was coming out of like the early to mid 80s, where people were making films and writing songs that were about just like being wealthy and like
absolutely
being opulent and being excessive. And this entire film is that, like in a nutshell. It is very opulent. It is very excessive.
Yes.
Vampires are very opulent and very excessive. So I feel like all of those things kind of tie together. And then also within the film, a lot of the like vampire mythology is less like magical in the way that other vampire films are, and it's more scientific, and it talks about it as if it's more of a disease, which I think is interesting given that like the AIDS epidemic was starting to happen in the early 80s too. And so this film sort of like isn't like directly referencing that, but if that's just something that's sort of happening within the political landscape at the time, I could understand why that would maybe have some sort of like low-key influences into like why this film got made in the first place, or why certain people were drawn to it in the first place.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, no, that's and it's something I've heard other people talk about in relation to this film. Is vampirism is kind of a symbol for the AIDS epidemic, and the AIDS epidemic at this point wasn't really in full swing yet. This is 1983.
No. Yeah, so
it's pre that, but this is the case in many things that we talk about on this podcast. It's not so much that it's quote unquote intentional as it is interesting to look back on it as a harbinger of what's to come.
Right.
And like you were saying, why this it was the zeitgeist moment. Like it was the perfect time to do this movie.
Right.
And my internet friend, her name is the Brooklyn Art Historian on Instagram, and her name is Shauna. She wrote a paper about the costumes in this movie and related it back to the symbols of the AIDS epidemic at that time.
Oh, wow.
Even though it's not intentional, they line up very well. And I highly recommend, well, I don't think that paper is available for the public, but
I
would
great. Love to read that.
Yeah,
I'm sure to it somewhere. That would be
absolutely.
really great.
I'm sure she would be happy to share it. Yeah. And maybe she'll have a link I can put in my Patreon for anybody else who wants to read it. It's really good. And she also talks about the costumes in the movie Dracula, in Bram Stoker's Dracula from the 90s. Love that movie as well. And the other paper that I read for this is that I sent to you is about urban representations of urban vampires in the films of the 80s and 90s. And the name of the author is escaping me at the moment, but again, you'll have
it's Stacey Abbott.
Stacey Abbott.
Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. That is right.
Great.
Yeah, and I'm going to link that in my Patreon as well. And I really liked that paper because she talks about the differences between representations of vampires in New York and vampires in LA. And because I talked about on this podcast the Lost Boys before, so that was really interesting to me. And one of the big differences is that in vampire movies that are set in New York, the word vampire is never uttered.
Right. The mythology is totally different.
Yeah, the mythology is totally different. And the vampires are lone vampires or with one other person. Whereas in movies that are vampire movies set in LA, there's like a whole pack of vampires or vampire gangs.
Right.
And New York is the kind of the perfect setup for that lone vampire because it's a very lonely, gloomy city.
Oh.
And we're here right now in this lonely
so
city.
We're New York vampires.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely relate more to representations of New York vampires, and in New York films that are set in New York in general. Stacey talks about in the paper are heavily influenced by like avant-garde art, experimental scenes that come out of New York, whereas vampire movies set in LA are very heavily influenced by Hollywood,
right?
Which is just a very different aesthetic and a very different messaging. So I thought that was worth noting. So now we'll start to talk about the plot. So we open in this film with perhaps the most iconic opening of all time.
Best opening of any film
ever made to this day.
Yeah.
And it's Bauhaus performing international goth anthem, Bela Lugosi's Dead. And the interesting thing about this song being right in the beginning of the movie is that it's a nod to the vampiric themes very cheekily, because the word vampire is never actually uttered. So it's kind of setting you up to know that this is about vampires without actually ever saying it directly. And Tony Scott discovered Bauhaus in a London nightclub and decided to put them in the movie.
Wow.
And Bauhaus is one of my all-time favorite bands. So, and I believe I was introduced to them actually through this movie.
Really?
Yeah. So,
love that.
It's just the best club scene ever. Take me to this club.
I know.
It's
like, why doesn't that exist here in New York?
Not anymore. I always kind of thought, I'm going to grow up and then I'm going to go to these goth clubs. And then by the
You're
time
like, right, it's not 1986 anymore. So
exactly.
It's not an option.
There's actually this goth musician named Voltaire. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he has this book that I read in high school about goth. It's like it's a comedy book, but it's about kind of his experience being goth in New York. And he says that at one point, like, it was 1995 and he hadn't seen any other goths for like weeks, and he saw this
lonely goth.
Exactly. And he saw this goth in the street and like came up to her and was like, where are our kind? Where have we gone? So I
love that.
Yeah.
It's like me every time I see another queer person in the room. I'm like, you.
Yeah, exactly. Or especially like a leather queer,
right?
Like where you can tell with the certain symbols that they wear. So this is where we first see David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve cruising a goth couple from across the club.
I just love that sentence.
Yeah, right? The absolute best.
Right. Goth cruising.
Goth cruising. And Miriam and John are really elegant, which contrasts with the kind of rough punk couple. And Shauna also writes about this in her paper, the difference between their appearances in that scene. They seduce the couple. They bring them. Do they go to the couple's house or do they go to their house?
I couldn't tell. And then when I was reading an article that someone wrote about this film, apparently they went to Long Island.
Oh, they do in the book. They're in Long Island.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that was
which is
over.
where this couple lives, like Long Island punks, I guess.
That makes sense.
Does it?
A little bit. That's how they could afford that apartment. And they seduce them. There's all these parallel edits with shots of monkeys in cages freaking out as they seduce and murder this couple.
Right. I feel like it's important to note just like the editing style that they sort of present to the audience at this moment, because that's like a reoccurring thing that happens throughout the film, which is one of my like favorite parts about this film. Just like as an editor, I get really nerdy about the way that they sort of structured things.
Absolutely.
And there's these like quick they're not quite montages, because a montage would sort of allude to like a sequence of events happening sequentially.
Yeah, it's
This is
parallel
like-
cutting.
Yeah, it's parallel cutting, or it's like just quick cuts to like abstract images that don't necessarily relate to anything else that's
Right.
happening, or they'll cut that in with like flashbacks, which isn't parallel, but it's like someone maybe daydreaming, or just like visual cues to let us know what else is happening in like one of the characters' minds at that time. So I just think that's like a really interesting way to sort of like structure a film. And within the first like 3 minutes, we see that.
Yeah, and you're right, it's present throughout the entire film. That style, I love it too, and it's so aesthetic. And
Even though like really jarring like audio cuts too, because even if you watch other like montage sequences in films, usually they try and like blend the audio so it feels more seamless. And with this film, it's just so harsh between cuts, which I love.
Love
It's,
it.
like, very jarring,
especially with these monkeys.
right?
And the monkeys are just screaming and freaking out in these cages,
Killing each other.
Yeah, killing each other. And that is really powerful, cut with the scene of them murdering this couple.
Right.
Because it's like this nod to the primal sexuality and danger element that's running through the whole film. You go ahead.
It's also a bit of foreshadowing too, because the disease that Sarah, or Susan Sarandon's character, is researching at her day job is the same. We don't know if it's actually the same disease or if it's something similar to what makes Miriam a vampire in the first place.
Yes.
Kind of like bloodthirsty, like ravenous type behavior. And so seeing these monkeys kind of like kill one another at the same time that Miriam and David Bowie's character, John, right?
John.
Are also like seducing and like killing someone, kind of like creates like a parallel thing happening between them.
Yes, absolutely. Miriam also uses this great Ankh dagger she has around her neck to slit the throats of her prey. So this is the first time we see the Ankh dagger.
Yeah, nobody has fangs in this film.
No. Yeah.
They kill each other with an Ankh.
Yes. Yeah, because Miriam Blaylock is supposed to be an ancient Egyptian.
Right, except she's white.
Well, except she's
so,
white.
It's just
so
real
that doesn't make sense at all.
There's a really cringy scene later on where she's dressed in like an Egyptian headdress.
Cringy. Really could have done without that. And in the book, she's also white in the book, and ancient Egyptian, which makes
a white ancient Egyptian.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all. We meet Susan Sarandon, Sarah, and she's a scientist who's working with these monkeys. And she's basically trying to find the key to immortality using the monkeys as test subjects. The city of New York, also in this movie, is, like I mentioned earlier, is kind of a character, despite the film not actually being shot there. And again, it's so essential to the plot that they're in New York, I feel like. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think because at no point do they actually say that they're in New York, but there's just enough visual cues to like allude to that.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really dissected like New York as a character in this film, but
it's also possible that I'm blending the book and the film together too, because they're so intertwined for me now that I've read the book, and New York landscape is mentioned a lot more in the book than in this film.
I mean, there's some really beautiful like wide shots that they get of like cityscapes in this film.
Right.
So they really try and like drive that in, that like this is like an urban landscape. This is New York City.
Yeah, exactly. So we see Miriam and John in their elegant New York townhouse.
Their most beautiful mansion.
Yes. Which in the book, I believe, is on the west side. And exactly. It looks like it's constantly filled with smoke.
Yes.
like fog machine.
Everything is always foggy.
Yes.
There's always billowing curtains.
Always.
In every scene.
Yeah.
It is always the same time of day in every scene because the shadows never change.
Yes.
It's the same kind of like low sun, like coming through like vertical blinds type lighting in every single scene.
Yes.
The curtains are always blowing in directions that don't actually make sense in relation to where the windows are.
Yes. It doesn't.
But also, like, I don't care.
Oh.
I'm like still here for it.
Honestly,
but, like, the whole thing
could
is,
not
like,
care less. Yeah.
fantastical, just in terms of like, you know, the set design. It's like not realistic. In any
Not
way.
at all. Yeah. And the atmosphere is just so thick. And there's also a really strong classical music presence in this film.
It's like classical music and then like heavy synth.
Yes.
And like that's it.
Which, you know, mood.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. Sarah is back at the lab struggling with her monkeys. They're getting sick. They're aging rapidly. They're turning on each other. Also, I love her hair. That was another note I have here.
Super 80s.
It's super 80s, short haircut.
Mm-hmm.
The scene is also parallel cut with images of John, so which leads us to assume that he's sick in the way that the monkeys are sick.
Right.
And he also has a memory. It was one of my favorite shots of him and Miriam in the 1700s pledging themselves to each other.
Their like wedding night is what I assumed that to be.
Yeah. Well, in the book, very interesting. I'm really spoiling the book for people. So, you know, if you want to read it, don't fast forward. But in the book, he's like a nobleman and he lives with his family on this estate. And Miriam is a sex worker who his father hires, and then John ends up falling in love with her, and she is like chooses him to be her next.
It's so much they kept that in the film.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's really described in detail in the book. You get a lot more of John in the book as well, and who he is, and
interesting
his thought process.
Because he's kind of like a flat character.
Mm-hmm.
All the men in this film are almost like
non-entities. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
he's definitely way more of a character, and you also get a lot of POV of him in his box as well. It's really rough, really fucked up. If you've seen the movie already, you know what's coming. So, Miriam is watching an interview that Sarah is doing on TV and is immediately drawn to her. Miriam's musical protege Alice comes over, and her and John, they all play music together. And it's not clear in the movie, but again in the book, Miriam, this is very creepy. Miriam is grooming this girl to be her next companion.
Yeah. So that I've never read the book, and I didn't even think that would be like an option in the narrative until, again, I was doing research on this and then saw that written down in an article and was just like, oh,
it's so creepy.
Yikes.
Yeah,
she's like 12.
Well, because she thinks that John is going to die about when Alice is like in her early 20s. She doesn't think that
she wasn't trying to make like a baby vampire.
No, she doesn't. She just thought she had more time with him. So
still really creepy.
It's of course it's very creepy. Oh. Yeah. And so she's grooming her to be her next companion because she knows John is going to get sick and die, just like all the other lovers. And the lovers don't know that.
No, she blatantly lies to them.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, it's just a very unsettling element of the plot here. And it's also, I mean, her alternating between men and women is also interesting and is very present in the book as well.
Like she actually alternates back and forth. Mm-hmm. It's not just like whoever.
Nope, it's not whoever she feels.
She's like, I got like 300 years with this man, then like 300 with this woman.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. I don't know what to make of that. Very upsetting representation of bisexuality. But
no, that's not how all bisexuals approach relationships. It's A and B, they rotate.
Right. So John is getting sicker and weaker, and he's aging more rapidly each day. Miriam goes to Sarah's book signing in a fabulous outfit. And
I do want to note that at this point in the film, Sarah and Miriam have not interacted with one another yet, but Miriam continues to kind of like watch Sarah from surveillance cameras, and surveillance cameras also have like a reoccurring theme throughout this film. And I like wrote a note at some point about how surveillance cameras are kind of like a way to illustrate like a modern day predator, like someone tracking prey, because she's always like being a voyeur in the way that she's watching Sarah, either like through the curtains or through the medium of like a CTV, through surveillance, or when she's watching Sarah like on that interview show talking about her book, like that's the first time that she sees Sarah for the first time. And so we kind of like see that happen throughout the entire film.
Love that observation.
Yeah. And then also the film ends with, I mean, we don't have to jump far ahead, but just like side note, Sarah at the very end of the film ends up kind of like watching someone else through the curtains. You kind of see like a switch happen in terms of like who their characters are.
Right. So. Well, if you haven't seen The Hunger, pause this immediately and go watch it, because it's one of the best vampire movies ever made, despite me ragging on some of the unsavory elements here. It really is a gorgeous, gorgeous film. So she's in this fabulous outfit. This is the first time they interact at Sarah's book signing. She's got this hat with a veil. She's got a salamander brooch. I wonder what the symbolism of the salamander is. And Sarah is smitten with her immediately. And this is another theme that's in a lot of vampire movies. Is this person actually smitten with the vampire, or is this the vampire's
like under the spell?
Exactly. And this is something I talk about a lot, and I'm actually working on a paper or essay about this, about the connection between codependent abuse and vampire mythology. And
this film is super codependent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Me forever and ever.
Yeah,
like that's your vow.
Pretty much every vampire movie is super codependent, because it's this vampiric figure feeding off of the energy of this other person by necessity.
Yeah.
And there's also always a consensual issue in vampire movies. Like, is the person being seduced genuinely, erotically activated by this person, or is this a spell? Is this Miriam's spell over her?
I mean, and as we see in the ending of this film, they kind of like, answer that question just with how Sarah sort of handles her turning at the end of the film.
Right. So, yeah. John interrogates Miriam about his illness. How long does he have left? How long did her other lovers last? Who will replace him? And Miriam has an agonized vision of another former lover calling out her name. And we see this other lover in kind of, in the book, it's ancient Rome. So it's kind of that atmosphere in this flashback. I love the flashbacks in this movie. It's so, I don't even know how to describe it. It's very like ancient and also completely of the time.
It's so 80s.
Yeah, still. It's so 80s. It's like an 80s music video about ancient Rome.
Yeah.
So again, I was saying Miriam alternates between male and female lovers every hundreds of years until they die from a mysterious illness that Miriam is actively trying to learn how to cure. And she thinks that Sarah is the key to learning how to cure this illness. So vampirism in the mythology here is, it's more of it's like something that we could all have access to. We just don't, because we're not using our brains to our full capacity, basically. In the book, they go into more detail. Like, Miriam is actually a separate race. So John, she's not like turning these people into her race.
Is that why they get sick and she doesn't?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So they depend on her to live. Again, very extremely codependent, but they're not actually the same as her. It's like, it's in more detail in the book, but still very vague, of course. John goes to Sarah's clinic, he's aging rapidly now at this point, and he goes to her clinic and demands help. So he can be out in the day also. That's interesting.
They can also look in mirrors too.
They can also look in
kind of
mirrors.
really beautiful
Yes.
camera shots of reflections of characters kind of like looking in mirrors and seeing things behind them and whatnot.
Yes.
So that's also not included in the mythology
Exactly.
of these vampires.
Right. He insists that he's a young man. And this is another theme I kind of wanted to talk about is the vampire and narcissism. The reason a lot of people in vampire films and lore are the ideals appealing to them is that they get to stay young forever. And John is learning quickly that it's catching up with him at this point.
Right.
And I thought the dialogue here was just very interesting, how he's insisting, I'm a young man. He's not.
No, he's
been
like
alive
400 years old.
Yeah, exactly. He's been alive for hundreds of years, but is still insisting that he's this young man. I just thought that spoke very much to the arrested development that happens in vampire films. I keep talking about, I have to keep saying films because I keep thinking like with vampires, like they're real.
I mean,
yeah. I don't know. I don't want to out myself or anything, but Sarah does not believe him. John is not doing too hot. He is aging rapidly right before our eyes, and so are the monkeys at the same time. And John is in the bathroom at one point and he looks in the mirror. It's really good.
It's also super gay.
It's very gay. He looks in the mirror,
cruising this like young boy, young shirtless boy for some reason.
Okay, I was like, why is this guy shirtless in this clinic bathroom? And John is now like 80 years old, and there's this young man next to him who's shirtless. And he's staring at this guy's body and studying him. And there's a moment where he's longing to be that again.
But also like consume it.
Yes.
Which is just like the gayest feeling ever.
Absolutely. I mean, I talk about that so much on this podcast. Like, do I want to be you or
like fuck you?
Or fuck
maybe
you.
Both.
Exactly. Which is just the ultimate gay feeling. Right. And it's just a very, very queer moment. He's lusting for this man's youth and his blood, and he contemplates killing him, but another man walks in and interrupts. Also, the shirtless man sees John like cruising him and is like, what the fuck? And I mean,
I wrote a note, he's hungry, horny, and distraught.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And he's like this creepy old man now. I mean, that also speaks to a very gay sensibility, especially with gay men, of being this hot young thing and at your height, and then all of a sudden aging, and then people looking at you like, what, you're this undesired old man. Yeah, exactly.
I can't remember where I pulled it from, but there was some article that I was reading about this, and someone wrote a line about how eternal or everlasting life is not everlasting youth, or eternal life is not eternal youth. And so despite the fact that like Miriam's lovers get to live forever, they're not technically young forever.
Yeah, she didn't lie.
Their youth forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they're just decaying in a box, but they're still alive forever.
Yes.
So
yeah. Oh my God,
that was like
so
interesting.
Disturbing. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah, it is. John is in agony. He's starved for blood. He runs into Sarah and leaves angry, and Sarah now sees how much he's aged in the last hour and believes him and tries to run after him, but he leaves. Okay.
And then the best film ever, or the best scene ever.
Roller skating punk sequence. There is a young punk with a mullet
in tight light wash denim,
roller skating in a tunnel.
In a tunnel with fog, backlit by blue lights. In slow motion.
It's everything.
And what could either be a pigeon or a dove. I wanted to say that it's a dove. Yeah. Flies by in slow-mo.
It's insane.
And there's a boombox. And I don't know what song is playing, but it sounds like just some typical 80s like death rock song.
Yes, it's such a good scene.
Yeah.
John attacks the punk roller skater, but he's too weak to kill him. And back at the house, Alice, the young girl, stops by to leave something for Miriam, and John is there, but she doesn't recognize him because he's so old now the scene is very creepy.
Yeah, it really is.
Very predatory, and it makes me deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah, we don't even see John's face for most of it. They sort of like allude to how much he's aged through either showing just his silhouette against a wall, or he's sort of like masked by a curtain or by like a really deep shadow where we only see his eyes, which just sort of adds to like the creepy like voyeur thing that's happening of him just sort of like preying on this young girl.
Absolutely. And the makeup is really good. The old age makeup.
Yeah.
The practical effects here, very good. And it's a very deeply uncomfortable scene. I believe it is on purpose. I believe we are supposed to recall the creepy predatory elements here and of old preying on. Just wait for that to go by.
Sorry, I live in a very busy street. There's a lot of sirens.
You know what? Honestly, fuck it. We're in New York. We're not in the studio today. I'm actually recording in Lainey's apartment. So, you know, you'll live.
Right.
Listeners. It's of what I was going to say of age preying on the young, preying on youth, preying on naivete, because Alice is so trusting and naive. She doesn't even know who this is.
Right.
He says he's a friend of John and Miriam.
Just like such a creep pickup line.
It's so creepy. I mean, it's such a typical creep pickup line that I believe that this all has to be very intentional and very much meant to disturb and creep us out. And it's very successful.
Right.
And she says, "Are you sure you're not John's father?" It's just horrible. So John kills Alice. And I think, you know, of all of the violence in this movie, this is the only time that it really upsets me.
Because you're watching a young girl.
Yeah, because she's like 12. Yeah. Miriam, and it also...
But they did shoot it really beautifully.
It's gorgeous, yes.
Like, it starts with her playing a violin solo, and then the music shifts. And then it's just a series of like those really quick cuts again of just like tight close-ups and kind of like macro shots of things happening. So they don't show it explicitly. They kind of just show like little bits of it. But yeah, it's still very uncomfortable. But just from a technical standpoint, it's really gorgeous.
Well, I mean, I also the other thing is just because I'm saying it's horrible and uncomfortable doesn't mean that I don't think it's good and that it's not necessary to the film.
Right. It absolutely is.
I think like I said, I think it's meant to be uncomfortable, and I think it's very successful in that. And it's very successful in being kind of the only very disturbing scene in the movie. And it also shows that he is so weak that the only person he can prey on is somebody who can't fight back. Yeah, exactly. Which is very indicative of a predator.
Right.
Which is what he is now, or what he's always been, but it's escalating. Miriam gets home and
she's wearing a great outfit in the scene.
She's
by the way.
Yes.
It's very like film noir.
Yes.
What she's wearing.
I mean, the costumes on this.
Beautiful.
Just everything. They're everything.
Right.
Like I've seen this movie a million times, and every time Miriam comes on screen with a new outfit, like, I gasp. Wow. Yeah, exactly. I mean, David Bowie's outfits are great too. Like, everybody looks amazing. Miriam gets home and John begs Miriam to kiss him and think of him as he was. And Miriam kisses him, and she has a vision of when they met, and she begins to cry as they kiss, and it's horrible and grotesque because John at this point is like,
he's so decrepit.
He's so decrepit.
Like,
he's
fragile.
basically a corpse. Yeah. Oh, also David Bowie's old acting kills me. So it's very painful, but it's also pretty funny. We just know we know it's David Bowie in old makeup.
Right.
And he begs for death. And
repeatedly.
And Miriam says she can't kill him. Miriam finds Alice's camera because she was always taking Instastacks and guesses that John killed her. John is now basically completely a corpse. It's also funny because at one point she's like putting Alice's stuff into a furnace.
She's putting Alice's body is what I read that as.
Okay,
because that's where they like bring their like victims.
Yes, because we didn't see her body, so I was getting a little confused.
But they show that like incinerator in the first scene.
Yes,
with that like goth couple that they killed. And then it's like
so that's where they put
the
their
tight
bodies.
shot of like all the flames. So
yes,
yeah.
So she's putting Alice's body in the incinerator, and John like appears in the doorway and is like, "Kill me."
Burning a child.
Yeah, it's really perverse.
Shouldn't be laughing.
I mean, it's extremely perverse. You have to laugh because it's like so awful.
And it's also so dramatic.
It's
too.
so dramatic, yes. And John he's completely withered at this point. Miriam carries him in her arms. I actually love this scene. She carries him in her arms into an elevator. And she whispers to him that their kind do not die like humans do.
Right.
There is no letting go, no rest. They simply grow too weak and they stay mentally conscious and aware as their body dies and decays.
It's horrifying.
I mean, I had somebody say to me recently that this movie isn't a horror movie. And I was like, are you kidding me? It's horrific that concept.
Right.
It's hard for me to even think about because it's pure horror.
Right.
And the way that she whispers to him too, like it's so loving.
And then she's done it so many times.
Yeah,
too.
exactly. She has a routine and a ritual for it. And she carries John all the way up a spiral staircase into an attic.
The most beautiful attic ever, also.
Yes, it's so gorgeous.
There's like a skylight. And then again, with the billowing curtains, with wind that's not actually coming from any specific direction.
Yes, and there's like the skylight
everywhere.
So many doves. The skylight is like an oculus,
right?
Like a circle eye in the middle of the ceiling, and it's just there's fog everywhere,
of course.
And this attic is basically a spooky vampire mausoleum.
For all of her exes.
We get this really beautiful shot. It's like a pietà moment with Miriam and John before she seals him in a coffin, surrounded by her dead but conscious lovers, doomed for eternity to be
First
conscious.
She introduces John.
Yes, she introduces it. They're doomed for eternity to be conscious in a corpse body. And all of their coffins also are indicative of the time that they lived in, which is interesting. Like John is in a modern 80s coffin, and then somebody else is in like a ancient sarcophagus. She speaks to her other lovers in their coffins and asks them to comfort John.
To keep him company.
This is truly horrible. Like, imagine being surrounded by your girlfriend's exes in an attic for all eternity.
For the rest of your life.
Yeah. What a nightmare. So, do we think that these exes actually can't die? Or do we think that them being alive is somehow connected to Miriam's power?
Well, I mean, just to jump ahead, when Miriam sort of meets her demise at the end, then all of her exes then like literally fall apart.
Right.
Like then they're able to like actually die once she's gone. So maybe it is like a life force thing where they're only kept alive because she's alive.
Right. And if she would just like, kill herself, they would all be released.
Right. Or I have a feeling that like maybe she would have the power to kill them, but she doesn't want to.
That's the
like
sense
she
that
wants
I get.
To keep them alive.
That's the sense that I got. Yeah. That she's like, I just can't
let him go.
Yeah, exactly. Because she also insists that she deeply loves all of them forever. Ooh, it's so creepy. So Sarah shows up at Miriam's and begs to see John, but Miriam says he went to Switzerland. A detective also shows up looking for Alice. This is when we see Miriam and he comes and goes. I'm so not interested in the detective subplot at all.
No, it's kind of pointless.
It's really pointless. It becomes in the sequel to The Last Vampire, it's a whole thing. But on this, I don't really care. We see Miriam has this beautiful garden. She senses Sarah about to get run over telepathically and communicates with her, and Sarah steps out of the way of the truck. So we see that they're connected. It's
Did you see that as Miriam saving her?
I did. What about you?
I sort of saw it as like Sarah almost getting hit by a truck because she's under Miriam's spell. Like she's just so like confused, because when she shows up at the door, she does ask for like, where is John? And then she's kind of frazzled and she's like, I don't know why I'm here. Is that the right scene? Is that what I'm thinking?
No, yeah, because it's a few things happen. So Sarah comes and goes.
Oh, this is when she gives Miriam her number and then leaves.
Yes, and then leaves, and then the detective comes and goes.
Got you. Okay.
And then we see...
I jumped too far ahead.
No. Yeah, and then we see Miriam in her garden, and she's like cutting flowers.
Right.
And then she like activates, like perks up, and she has this telepathic vision of Sarah almost getting run over by a truck.
Interesting.
So that was kind of my thought, was that they're connected now in however non-consensually they've connected, but Miriam is like in her head now.
Right. I definitely saw it as that like Sarah was under her spell.
Right. So Sarah is at home with her useless boyfriend.
I think I literally wrote the same thing.
Oh my God. That's very gay of us.
I don't even know his name.
Oh,
it's
I forget.
Rob or like
it's
Tom.
Something useless.
Or Bob. Like mediocre cis man name.
I think it is Bob. I feel like it is. It's probably not. It's irrelevant. He's irrelevant. Oh my God. He has such a bigger part in the book, and it's maddening because who cares? And there's like more POV from him in the book, and I'm like, oh
Don't
my
care.
God, I almost skipped those chapters. I was like, okay, anyway. And she's with her boyfriend in her weird neon apartment.
The bathroom is amazing in this scene. Also makes no sense that anybody would have a bathroom with like royal blue lighting.
It's insane,
but it's gorgeous on film.
So it is gorgeous.
I'm here for it.
Well, and it's also like Sarah's apartment is like very 80s, and Miriam's apartment is very of no time and place.
Right.
Like
Sarah's wardrobe is also very 80s too. The like giant shoulder pads, pantsuit type thing.
I mean, her hair.
Like feathered, like teased hair.
Oh, it's so good. And her apartment is also very smoky.
Every apartment
is
fog
smoky
everywhere.
Sarah cannot stop thinking about Miriam. So she goes over to Miriam's house, and we get to see more of Miriam's gorgeous home. Sarah is smitten with her. There's a lot of lesbian tension.
There is.
So good.
Oh, Sarah has also hallucinated like seeing Miriam at multiple times up until this point.
Yes.
And also like hallucinates that Miriam calls her at work and like picks up the phone, and her coworker is like, Sarah, nobody called. She's like, really? I thought the phone rang.
Oh, I completely forgot about that. Oh yeah. So she's like infected by her.
Right.
And again, it's very vague as to if this is Miriam's doing or if Sarah is genuinely
just like enamored and obsessed with her.
Sarah asks there. So some sexy things happen with the piano. Miriam is playing the piano. Sarah asks Miriam if she's hitting on her.
Well, first she asks what song is being performed, because Miriam is sitting at the piano playing a song, and so Sarah asks like, what piece is that? And Miriam tells this narrative of an Indian princess who owned a female slave, and the two women would then like go into some magical garden to like sing a song together or something like that. So Sarah's like, oh, is this a love song? And Miriam tells her, she's like, no, I told you it was sung by two women. And Sarah's like, but it does sound like a love song. And Miriam's like, well, then I suppose it is. And that's when she's like, are you making a pass at me?
Yes. Oh, because it's it's that song Duet of the Flowers, which is a famous operatic song that is used in a lot of movies when lesbian stuff is about to happen. And it's also used in the L Word when,
of course.
Yes, when Bet is fingering Alice at the opera. So
footnote,
yeah,
gay footnote.
Yeah, exactly. So that, yes, I'm glad you brought that up because this song is used in a lot of movies to indicate that some lesbian stuff is about to go down.
Right. Also, Sarah has taken off her 80s blazer and is wearing just a white t-shirt and no bra. Yeah. You can very visibly see her nipples through her shirt.
Yes. So it's almost like she went over there dressed like that for a reason.
Right.
And yes, this is when she asks if Miriam is hitting on her, and Miriam doesn't give an answer.
No, Miriam goes, not that I'm aware of, Sarah.
Which is like not an answer. And of course, this is the scene we're spending the longest on because it's
the best scene.
Yeah, it's all leading up to the best. And Sarah spills wine on her white shirt that she's wearing, like we said, with no bra.
Right.
And Miriam begins to help her clean her shirt. And this is when they finally kiss.
And the whole thing is in slow-mo.
Yes.
Also.
Yeah. And the song is playing and
dramatic classical music.
Exactly.
Fog.
And they have
billowing curtains.
Yes. And they have sex in front of a mirror.
They do.
Yeah.
And Sarah's wearing like the most 80s like high-waisted black underwear ever, which I also just love.
So
looks
good.
So good.
I mean, Susan Sarandon is gorgeous.
She's babe.
It's very sexy. So aesthetic.
Yeah. And Miriam is in like a lacy 80s onesie.
Yes. Oh my God.
Which is really good.
Yeah.
Also.
I mean, the one qualm I have about this sex scene is that they don't, I think it's on purpose. Like the choreography of the sex scene, I feel like they're like so like tentative and like not actually having sex in it.
Right. It's very like soft.
Yes.
Kind of male gazy.
Exactly.
And yeah. I think the slow motion with the billowing curtains and the classical music also just makes it a little bit more removed from anything realistic.
Yes. Yeah. And but I will say, like, the scenes where they're with that couple in the beginning and the scenes where she's with John are also kind of the same.
Right.
So it's not like, I think this is a stylistic choice to make the sex like very stylized in this way. And then they feed on each other's blood.
Yes, they do. On a bed that is lit from underneath.
Oh, yes. The bed. Oh, my God.
Again, makes no sense, but looks absolutely beautiful on film.
So good. I love when they feed on each other's blood. It's really hot. And there's, the queerness and immortality, right? Like their immortality, the concept of it sort of interrupts the basic heteronuclear family structure inherently. Like if you never die, then there's no rush to, or there's no reason to mate and couple and settle down and like preserve your legacy, right? So I was sort of thinking about that as well, like how, I don't know, like this is maybe a vague question, but like what do we think about the queerness or the lesbianism in this movie? Like it's so almost casual, like not explored as explicitly lesbian, like nobody says the word. Yeah, exactly. And it's not even like there's any kind of insane internal struggle that Sarah has with being attracted to a woman. Like it's kind of just is.
Right.
And it's because Miriam is almost like this genderless, just kind of beautiful figure. Like vampires are often portrayed as like just gorgeous genderless beings that people just fall in love with because they're so, erotic. And I don't know, I still struggle with talking about the queerness in this movie because it's so just there,
right?
In a way, like it's not, like I said, like nobody ever even says anything explicit about it. And especially in this scene, I mean, it's a sex scene between two women. It's the only sex scene in the movie. And I don't know. It's just kind of fascinating to me, the way that they set everything up here.
Right. I know. I feel like I also have a hard time sort of pinpointing it.
Yeah.
Whether it feels real or whether it feels like just like whether it feels real or whether it feels more contrived or like just more there for like style, and it's not necessarily like about a lesbian relationship.
Yes, exactly.
It was just sort of like there by coincidence.
Yes. Or it's there to be kind of like titillating because this concept that this gorgeous, beautiful woman vampire alternates between male and female lovers every hundreds of years. And I guess I've never actually I've seen this in a couple other movies. In the movie Nadja, the vampire Nadja, she is talking to like her Renfield-ish kind of servant, and she says like, I would like a woman. I haven't had a woman in a few hundred years. And so I've seen this in a few other vampire movies of the bisexual female vampire. And I guess I can't help but I always have to be critical of things I love. So even though I love this movie, I can't help but feel like it's, kind of using bisexuality as a way to talk about greed and predatory behavior. Something to think about. At the same time, you could also make the case that it's so casual that it's almost kind of...
It's like a non-issue.
Yeah, it's a non-issue. It's almost kind of great representation.
Right.
It's like it's
no
not even a
like,
thing.
Yeah, like nailing it over the head repeatedly that like this is about like a queer dynamic. Like it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So Sarah is having a dinner again with her useless boyfriend after this amazing blood fetish sex she just had, and
for 3 hours. By the way,
3 hours, yes, which feels honestly kind of short for
a bloodletting scene.
For a bloodletting lesbian sex scene. Yeah, 3 hours is nothing. I mean, that was like a quickie for them. She's now also wearing an Ankh pendant.
Right.
So she like belongs to Miriam, and her boyfriend is really jealous.
He's the worst.
And
in this scene.
Yeah. And we're talking about how the queerness is kind of a non-issue, but now I'm almost taking it back a little bit because I feel like in this scene,
I mean, he's totally threatened by the idea that his girlfriend may or may not have like just had an affair with a woman.
Yes. And it's specifically because it's a woman. And also this scene is so, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it's very much the experience of being closeted but dating a man.
Yeah. I know that there's a line in there because she like orders a raw steak and doesn't eat it because she's starting to turn, and so she doesn't want like human food anymore.
Yes.
And he's sort of like scolding her and is like, why did you order that if you're not going to eat it? Like, why would you order a steak if you're not hungry? And she makes some line about like, well, I thought I wanted it. And I'm like, that's such a metaphor for like every time I ever tried to like sleep with a man. Yeah. Just like, I thought I wanted that. I thought I wanted to order that thing, but I actually don't. Front of me, like I don't actually want that.
Yes, exactly. So maybe I'm taking back what I just said. Like I feel like this is explicitly addressing Sarah's nascent queerness. So she can't stop thinking about Miriam, and her boyfriend is pathologizing her and wants her to see a doctor, which is also
after repeatedly saying, what the hell is wrong with you?
Yes.
In the middle of a restaurant.
Yeah, exactly.
Just gross.
In the middle of the darkest restaurant in New York. And this is very familiar. I mean, he's, like there must be something wrong with you, right?
Right, because she's not interested in him anymore.
Yeah.
Therefore, there's something wrong with her.
Exactly. And it's not because he's spectacularly boring. Yeah. Back in her neon apartment, Sarah is sick because she's turning into a vampire and she's ravenous but can't eat food. And back at the clinic, they're studying Sarah's blood. They've taken a sample of her blood to see what's up with her, and she's become superhuman. Like her blood is actively killing any other pathogens or whatever.
Right. They said that whatever blood is running through her veins is non-human.
Yes.
And it is essentially at war with her own blood. And she asks which side is winning. And they let her know that it's like the superhuman blood.
Yeah,
it's
so
like
she's
taking over.
Right. So she's becoming completely dependent and merged with Miriam. She confronts Miriam. Sarah gets very sick at Miriam's house.
Again, when she
ahead.
confronts Miriam, she's wearing a really beautiful silver metallic trench coat.
Amazing.
Side note, the costuming again is just
on
like
point.
so fantastic.
I want every outfit.
Yeah.
Sarah gets very sick at Miriam's house, and Miriam takes care of her, and she brings her home a man for Sarah to feed on.
She goes, picks up a man.
Yeah. It's pretty great.
He also is disposable.
Yes, exactly.
Just another man in this film who like doesn't really have a name, doesn't really have a purpose other than to kind of like drive the character development of the women in the film.
He's food.
Yeah. Literally.
Yeah.
He also was wearing his sunglasses indoors at night.
Oh, he's on cocaine.
Automatically makes him a douchebag.
Yeah. He was on cocaine. It's the 80s. He had to put his...
Probably.
Yeah. Boring boyfriend Tom. Oh, okay, his name is Tom.
Bob. That's close enough.
Whatever. Comes by Miriam's looking for Sarah. And Tom finds Sarah in bed and tries to get her to leave with him.
I hate this scene. He also just gets even more like aggressive.
He's so aggressive.
Cringy.
Yes. And Sarah tries to get him to leave because she knows that Miriam let him in there for Sarah to feed on.
Mm-hmm.
And Miriam has a very harrowing and cringy vision of herself in ancient Egypt with a headdress on, feeding on a victim who's the only black, the only black person that we see in the movie.
Well, Sarah's coworker, whose name was Black Man.
Yes, exactly.
Works with her. But yeah, those are the only two people of color in this entire film.
Yes. And one of them is a coworker with no name and the other one is dead. So that's...
right.
Not great. I mean, I'm sure Ashley Blackwell of Graveyard Shift Sisters has written about this somewhere on her
Someone
site.
needs to write about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah emerges from the bedroom covered in blood. She looks amazing.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah, presumably having fed on Tom.
And Miriam is just sitting and playing the piano.
Yes.
Which is also just like beautiful that she's doing that. And then her like new girlfriend comes in covered in blood.
I mean, I aspire. I want to be sitting at the piano in my townhouse mansion when my girlfriend comes.
Because your like blood bottom comes back into the room.
Exactly. As my blood bottom comes back into the room. And just covered in blood
from some man that she just killed.
I mean, I'm here for that. Yeah. I'm here for forced murderous bisexuality. Miriam explains to her that now they will be together forever. You will forget what you were and you will begin to love me as I love you.
It's intense.
I mean, you all
just run away if someone ever said that to me.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like if it was a few years ago, I'd probably be into it. But now I know it's unhealthy.
Red flag.
Yeah, exactly. Blood flag. They have a hot, bloody kiss. It's so hot. And Sarah takes the Ankh pendant from Miriam and stabs someone in the throat. We don't know who it is just yet.
Right.
And then we see as Sarah kind of falls to the ground.
Well, they keep kissing, which I love. That there's literal blood splurting out of something.
Yes.
And they're still just like making out in it.
I mean, if you have a blood fetish,
watch this film.
Yeah, watch this movie. And then we see that she's stabbed herself in the throat. Mm-hmm. She would rather die than live this way,
right?
Which, you know, I find unrealistic. I mean, in the book, like she is suicidal because she killed Tom and she loves Tom.
Ew.
And I'm like, really?
Bob.
Yeah, exactly. That's a better name for him. So Miriam is in agony over this because Sarah is on the ground dying, but Sarah doesn't know that she can't die. It's just that she takes Sarah up to the attic full of lovers to entomb her, and Sarah doesn't know that all she's done is kill her body. She can't kill her consciousness. So she's just sped up the process that was eventually going to happen in a few hundred years.
Right.
But somehow all of Miriam's dead lovers have escaped their tombs.
Attack of the Exes.
Yeah, Attack of the Exes. Yep. And are coming for Miriam. And she yells at them that she loves
you.
I love you.
I love you all.
Exactly. How did
They're like trying to destroy her.
How did they get out of the boxes?
I don't know. This whole ending gets a little murky.
Yeah.
In terms of like how we get from point A to B.
It
doesn't totally
did John like
make
incite a riot?
Mutiny.
Yeah, John caused a mutiny.
God.
But again, this does not happen in the book. Like Sarah just gets entombed and is now like one of the lovers in a box.
Because I was one of the articles that I was reading was saying that when Sarah slits her own throat, she essentially like exposes, but I guess that wouldn't make sense. Like exposes Miriam to her like contaminated blood, which is why when Miriam then falls over the banister, which happens after her exes kind of like come for her and like surround her and start attacking her, she like freaks out, jumps back, and falls over the stairwell banister down into like the entryway of the house. And then she starts like writhing around on the ground, aging rapidly. This article was saying that that's because like she was then covered in Sarah's blood, and
I don't
she
think
like
so.
got the disease that made her age rapidly.
No, I feel like that's not it.
No,
Maybe.
I mean, I don't know any other explanation though why
Yeah.
she falls down a flight of stairs and then suddenly just ages to her death in a matter of like a minute, and then all of her exes start falling apart and then they all die.
I thought like the fall just killed her. Like I thought I have this idea that she's immortal, but she's not unkillable. And that falling from that height, like she died.
Why does she age then?
I guess I just was like, this is what happens when this race dies.
They decay.
Yeah. And then that means it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And, it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's not true to the book. Like, this is when they had to, like, deviate from the book. And they were like, it's just a killer. It's
right. Well, I read somewhere that they had a different ending for it. And then I guess when they showed it to test audiences, people got upset and said it was, like, too dark.
It was the original ending.
Like, rewrote the ending into what you see on film, which is kind of just doesn't make sense.
Well, I think that that has to be why it doesn't make sense, because I think the original ending was true to the book, which is dark, and I think people need like the predator, the villain, to die in movies. I don't, but I think a lot of people want that
happy ending.
Yeah, like a quote unquote happy ending. So as you were saying, she gets attacked by her exes, and she falls from the flight of stairs and she starts to age rapidly, and all of the exes are finally free and can die.
They're all just standing over her at the top of the staircase looking down on her. Yeah. Which is just horrifying to think about if all my exes were just like standing above me, staring at me.
Yeah.
At once,
as corpses.
Horrible to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I do not want to imagine that.
No.
In the end, we see this detective who was hunting down Alice.
Again, useless character.
Useless. Enter the now empty house, which is being sold off. And we see Sarah still alive.
Somewhere. It doesn't look like New York.
No.
It looks like, I don't know what city it's supposed to be, but it does not look like a New York landscape.
No. Maybe it's LA or something.
I don't know.
Yeah. And she's in her own smoky apartment.
Right.
With a male and a female lover.
Right.
And now she keeps Miriam in a box. and she looks longingly over the skyline from her balcony.
And then the credits roll.
Yeah, and that is The Hunger. So, wow. Love this movie.
Yeah.
I think my favorite parts are the costumes, the music,
the lighting design,
the lighting
kills me.
Yeah, and you were saying that this also inspired your work, the lighting design and the aesthetic and everything.
Yeah. Not like so directly. I think if you just like looked at my work without knowing me, you wouldn't necessarily see the influence in it, but I've used this film in so many mood boards for so many years now. Yeah. I
think they should remake this movie with an actually Egyptian vampire.
Whoa.
And that would be what I would want to see.
Yes.
But yeah, maybe someone picked this up. I don't know, lesbians, vampires, it's got everything. Goths.
Right.
I mean, come on.
Fog machine.
Fog machine. Yeah.
Lesbians, fog machine.
It's hard for me to even like talk about how much I love this movie because I'm like, well, duh. Yeah. Like,
right.
Of course I love this movie. Like, it's part of my DNA. Right. I feel like. So, Lainey, thank you so much for doing this episode.
Of course.
Where can people find you on social media?
I have multiple Instagram accounts.
Great.
You can find my more like personal page with all of my fetish photography on Instagram. My handle is Lover, which is spelled Lovvr. And then I also run a second account where I curate fetish art. So I'm also like a book collector and a porn collector. So I have a lot of scans that I'll then post to this other Instagram account, and that is called Dressed for Pleasure. Just all one word, no underscores or anything.
That's
so if you're into fetish photography, follow my account because that's
follow
my work.
Both, please.
But then also look at my other page too.
Oh my God, but okay. First of all, I can't speak highly enough of Lainey's photography. Like,
thank you.
Go hire her. Go look at her Instagram. Like, it is everything. And also your Dressed for Pleasure account is, I think, my favorite Instagram account. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Dressed for Pleasure. And there's another account I really like called Fetish Therapy. I don't know who runs it.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know.
I need to look that up.
It's just fetish art. It's old fetish art. Yeah. And
Great.
I really like that. And yeah, if you need more leather dykes in your life, go scoop that up.
Yeah.
Which we all need more leather dykes in our life.
Also, if you are a nerd for books and porn and you know of other queer fetish photographers, specifically like in the 70s and 80s, because it's most of everything that I post on that page, please send me those because I feel like I get stuck and there's only so many. And the majority of the work that I post on Dressed for Pleasure is like shot by men. And most of the models are just like thin white women because that's typically the only stuff that has gotten exposure over the last like 30 years. Yes. So if you have recommendations of other artists, please just like send them to me.
Yeah, let me know. My listeners often send me messages when I announce things on the podcast. So do it again, guys. And what is another thing I want to say? Oh, we kind of didn't talk about, I mean, this is just to mention like how inspired by like Helmut Lang this movie is.
Helmut Newton
in this movie, one of the helmets. And how inspired by Helmut Newton this movie is. And I just wanted to mention that as well because you were talking about your account and
and he's also one of my like all-time favorites, which feels like a cliche because he's like the biggest out there. But yeah, there's a reason why
exactly.
I love it. I mean, we're sitting in my apartment right now and you can see my like fat ass like Helmut Newton book on my coffee table. Yes. And I have his art like hung up and framed all over my apartment. So
amazing.
Yeah, love.
Yes. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter as Girls Guts Giallo. You can follow my personal account at FatGawth, FATGAWTH. And you can not donate because I actually make content. So you're subscribing.
Not a charity.
Yeah, exactly. To my Patreon, which is patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. And you can find all my bonus content there, bonus episodes and articles and things of that nature. So check it it out. And until next time, I'm Annie Rose Malamut, and this is Girls, Guts, and Jello.
White on white, translucent black capes, back on the rack. Bela Lugos is dead, the bats have left the bell tower, the victims have been bled, red velvet lines, the black box. Bela Lugos is dead. Bela Lugos is dead. I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead. I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead. The virginal brides file past his tomb. Still many times their flowers be wrapped in deathly bloom. Alone in a darkened room, the Count. Bela Lugos is dead.